I want to thank everybody for coming out to this panel. It's particularly important in the case of Haiti, as and I think one of our panelists may discuss this. Haiti is historically the case of bad press, right? For those of you who don't know, Haiti's full name is not Haiti, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. But it seems that that phrase is so just put out in one word that we would expect to find that that is the name of the country. And panels like this, especially vis-a-vis empire, show how Haiti is not an island and is part of a global project. I think that leads to destabilization. And so I welcome you now officially to this panel that it seems that everybody has sat down to. But Haiti right now is caught up in a political crisis. A political crisis that, in my opinion, is the sum work of the 10 years of PHTK political party that culminated in the assassination of Jovenel Moïse. Thank you. My name is Felix, as you are finding out. And that left a vacuum where Henri, the darling of empire, was left to uphold his interest. And you have civil, political, business actors seeking also to curry the favor of the international. You have gangs whose arms traffic on the vehicles of empire, people who live on less than $5 US a day, who have hundreds of dollars of ammunition in their hands, probably bought by the agents of empire. And you have the Haitian people who are living in the indignity of getting caught in the crosshairs or run over on the tracks of empire. And I'm a historian, and recently the New York Times published what seemed to be sort of the answer for this. But I think empire has moved a lot since then, and empire moves in different ways. Whereas in the 2010 earthquake, we have empire moving as humanitarian relief. In the involvement in the 2010 election, you have empire moving as democratic institution building. With the UN occupation, you have empire moving as security. And throughout, again, the Haitian people suffered the indignity of being trampled underfoot. But that's enough about me and my positions. I'm gonna pass it over to the people here that you paid to see. To my immediate left, to your right, this was not in order, I have it written, we have Howard French, who is a career correspondent and global affairs writer. He began his career as a freelance writer for the Washington Post, then worked for the New York Times. He spent 20 years covering Central America, the Caribbean, Asia, Africa. He's published several books. 2014, China's Second Continent. 2004 is A Continent for the Taking. And more recently, Born in Blackness, Africa, Africans in the Making of the Modern World, 1471 to the Second World War. And it's an award-winning book. Not that the other ones haven't been, but I just wanted to say it on this one. To his immediate left, we have Dr. Amara Enyia. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Awesome. She's a strategist, public policy expert, and social impact professional. She looks at the way local policy as well as international affairs impact the local. She specializes in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. She is the president of Global Black, a transnational advocacy organization. She's the manager of policy, and I can't read what I wrote, for the Movement for Black Lives. She's the chairwoman of the International Working Group for the UN Permanent Forum on Peoples of African Diaspora. And she's also a grassroots organizer, international, local, very busy. To her left, you have Dr. Mamyrah Prosper. She's an assistant professor of anthropology in the Department of Global and International Studies. Her work focuses on Haitian social movements, globalization, the role of gender in social movements, and against the local resistance to global hegemonic thrust. Her work has appeared in academic and popular presses such as NACLA, Women's Studies, Presently, Black Agenda Report, and Left East. And first, but not to your left and not least, we have Dr. Marlene Daut. She's the professor of French and African American Studies at Yale. Before that, she was at the University of Virginia for a number of years. She's the author of many articles, manuscripts, interviews, and NPR. author of academic works such as 2015's Tropics of Haiti, 2017's Ballon de Vaste and the Origins of Black Atlantic Humanism. She has a book about unleashed stuff that you guys will find out soon about. She's published widely in Essence, Harper's, New York Times, The Conversation, Black Perspectives, and she's the editor of Global Blackness. And with that, I will sit and cede the floor. Thank you all. I'm sorry, a note on the format. I'm not a good moderator. They will come up here and speak for about 3 to 4 minutes, and then I will come back up and sort of work a flowing conversation, and maybe I will not be necessary, but go ahead.
Okay. Is it necessary actually to come up?
You can sit.
That'd be much better.
Are your mics on?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I have the dubious honor and pleasure of being the first one to speak. I'll try to make the best of this. It's not what I anticipated. I wear a few hats. I'm a journalist by career, as the generous introduction stated. I work as in. This is a strange thing for me to say, given what I've already said, is that I'm a journalist, but I work in the academy, and I also write nonfiction things. Haiti sits in a very particular place in my experience amid this three-cornered hat, or three hats that I just described, in that I spent some very momentous years as a journalist in Haiti beginning in the late 80s and into the early 90s. And unlike other parts of the world that I went on to cover, unlike other parts of the world that I went on to cover, cover is a term of art for us journalists. I have not returned very often topically to Haiti as a journalist since then. So I left Haiti in the mid-1990s as a journalist and went on to other regions. And I'm not going to do all that. I have come back to Haiti most recently through one of the other corners of my hats. Actually, two of them: my work in the academy and my writing as a nonfiction. Particularly as my career has taken in writing nonfiction, a sort of long long turn toward history writing. And in my most recent book, Born in Blackness, I spent a lot of time talking about what Haiti has meant for the emergence of this thing that we call modernity. And it's a story that's not unfamiliar to anyone who spends time thinking or writing about Haiti, but it's a story that's quite unfamiliar to people who don't spend time thinking or writing about Haiti. As an aside, I wrote recently in the New York Review of Books an essay critical of V.S. Naipaul's writing of the most famous novel about Africa, and has produced a torrent of letters in response to the essay. And they finally asked me to engage, as they often do, with some of the letters. And one of the letters was from a professor at Boston University who's a Naipaul scholar, who said basically that I had misunderstood Naipaul, that everything he says that one might understand as being derogatory or dismissive of Africa is actually ironic, and that it's not, that he's not really dismissing Africa or insulting Africa. That's not the point. This isn't where I'm going with this. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about it. They wanted me to respond to that letter, and I spent a lot of time thinking about how to do so. And so I went back. I had already read this. My original essay was about a bend in the river, but I went and I looked at all of Naipaul's writing, re-looked at all of Naipaul's writing about the African and African descended world. So that means not just the African continent, but that means the Caribbean Basin, that means South America, which includes northern South America, obviously, and also the Caribbean islands, includes the United States, et cetera, et cetera. And I came across this phrase in an early book by Naipaul, The Middle Passage, in which he said that the West Indies is a part of the world that has produced no achievement. That was the actual claim, that language, no achievement. And this was This brings me back to Haiti. This was a breathtaking, and I read the Middle Passage years ago. That had not stuck with me. A general impression had stuck with me. But that particular phrase, I had lost memory of that phrase. I addressed this a bit in, not a bit, I addressed this substantially more in Blackness, but to claim that the Caribbean, which was the firehouse of the modern age. It was, somebody said yesterday that, it may have been you who said something about France, or perhaps it was Amy, that you look at the Champs-Élysées or the Grand Avenues of France, you should think of Haiti. This actually begins in the golden century of France, in the 18th century of France, when Haiti was producing, or then Saint-Domingue was producing 1/3 of the island of Hispaniola was producing 40% of the entire sugar production in the world, at a time when sugar was the most valuable traded commodity in the world. The golden century of France was about Saint-Domingue, right? And so this got me to thinking about I don't think I've ever encountered such a complete case of erasure in my experience in terms of thinking about how we understand the way the world works and how the world was built and the various factors of violence and production that actually put us in this room here today. If you begin to trace things, if you take the time to trace things carefully all the way back to their origins, right? I want to speak. You said we should speak for 3 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that. So I don't want to go on too long, but I wanted to speak a little bit about contemporary. And one of the reasons I have not worked in my journalism very often, quite seldom. I've produced works of journalism since leaving that part of the world about Haiti. Goes back to beyond the crises, the recent crises that you alluded to, but a general feeling in that corner of my three-cornered hat as a journalist of impotency. That the situation in Haiti, I don't know where exactly to place this on chronologically, but for some time now has struck me as few problems do, as intractable, as a kind of Gordian knot that I don't see the end of the thread that you might pull to make the thing come undone and point the way forward, right? And so this is really a confession to the audience that, as a journalist, when I'm functioning in that mode as a journalist, my default is to sort of look for the fault line, the thing that you can crack open the puzzle and try to point toward some way forward. And as I thought about what I might say to a group like this, I realized that this has something to do with how I got away from in writing about, in journalism, in writing about Haiti as a topic. I want to say just one final thing, and that is I came to my experience as a correspondent for the New York Times in Haiti at the end of the 80s and in the early 90s, certainly from the perspective of the New York Times correspondent, and also from the perspective of the foreign press corps that was in Haiti in that era, from a very unusual place. I had spent my first formative years in Africa as a journalist, as a freelancer, working in West Africa, especially, not only, but especially working, the very beginnings were in French-speaking Africa. So I arrived in Haiti kind of naturally inclined to looking for continuities, parallels, and contrasts based on how these two parts of the world fit into the history of French imperialism, since this is a conference about empires and imperialism, essentially, right? And most of my peer journalists at the time were, if they had foreign experience, they were Latin Americans. They were not sensitive. Yeah, they were not sensitive to the pattern of French Empire or anything like that. The clock is ticking. The observation I'd like to leave for others perhaps to pick up on is that, I said in my comments yesterday, I quoted Fanon saying that colonization is a mental disease. plants mental disease in the minds of the subjects. And these disease processes take on a life of their own, very difficult to cure and to overcome, right? But there's something worse than colonization. And what I'm about to say about colonization, there's something worse than complete colonization. And this is not meant as a recommendation for being completely subjugated by another power as a colony at all. But what is worse than complete colonization is half-assed colonization, half-hearted colonization, colonization on the cheap, colonization with literally no attention to imparting anything of lasting value other than the fact of putting the colonized people into a position of submission. And this, in the final analysis, is the thing that I have taken away from these two experiences. Their histories in different time periods, but of Francophone Africa and of Haiti vis-a-vis France. The colonization of Francophone Africa was one of economic exploitation on a scale that I think American audiences tend not to know very much about, but just rank vacuuming away from these countries in a very short period of time and giving almost nothing back. And so this is the parallel that from a distance I have come to see with the Haitian experience. So I'll perhaps have occasion to come back to that. I'm sorry for you guys chose me to go first. So I lost it and put us all off schedule. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Did we already have lunch? Are we in the afternoon slump? It's really good to be here. I want to thank the organizers. I definitely want to thank Amy for the invitation to speak at this conference, as well as my colleagues who I did a little bit of background research, so to get a little bit familiar and have been a fan of many of his work. I think the perspective, I just have a few brief comments on Haiti and sort of the context of imperialism. And the first is just to ground the importance of Haiti from a lineage standpoint as being Igbo and having a shared lineage. So positioning the connection that we have in this notion of people of African descent and where we ended up, and the importance of recognizing those relationships as still very real and very tangible. And, you know, we had our own civil war, if you will, and Haiti was one of the few countries that actually supported the Igbo people. And so we never forgot that. And so it is, when we talk about the African diaspora, Africa and the African diaspora, part of the project, especially in light of imperialism and colonialism, is that work to repair relationships, the work to build relationships, the work to reclaim our stories, our heritage, and to make those connections wherever we find ourselves, which means that we cross lines of geography, of language, the unique cultural evolution that occurs based upon where we ended up, but it's still there. And so that is very encouraging. And it's also why Haiti always factors large when we talk about bringing people of African descent together, when we talk about the work ahead and exposing imperialism, exposing neocolonialism, exposing all of these systems that were constructed to perpetuate the exploitation of people of African descent, Africans and people of African descent around the world. So that grounding has always been important to me. We don't exist in a vacuum. The experiences that we have do not exist in a vacuum, because we all are living under global systems that were created to perpetuate this current order. And so that brings me to a point that I think is worth mentioning, because I do a lot of work in the space of reparations and reparatory justice. This is a topic that years ago was considered fringe. It was almost, you would never be in a conference of various backgrounds discussing this topic, but now it has become much more central to conversations around what does it look like to create the kind of world that actually reflects the values that we have. And so when we talk about reparations, there are domestic efforts, many in the Caribbean that have really advanced. When you look at Barbados and you look at just so much of the advancement of those conversations is happening in the Black world. But there's this concept of repair that is really important when we think about the cost of imperialism, the cost of colonialism, and what it means to have constructed an entire global order and institutions that perpetuate it, but that for some reason always seem to be in the background. And so what I would want to impress upon you today is this notion of acknowledging, because we hear about the harm. And I participated or was able to attend a discussion that the National Association of Black Journalists held just a couple of weeks ago, talking about how journalists should be covering Haiti. What are the tropes that journalists use when they're describing Haiti? And it's important to note the role, and as a trained journalist, so that's actually my first profession, of media and journalists and journalism as tools of system perpetuation. Yes, there are those who are doing this work to shine light, to illuminate, to call attention to speak truth to power, etc. But I think we do a disservice if we underemphasize or downplay the role that the media, that journalists have played in system perpetuation, meaning the adoption of the tropes, the adoption of the common phrases that are put forth as fact, that lay the groundwork for the ways that imperialism can then work on the ground. Language matters. And so when the government, for example, in the United States labels Black identity extremists, it's not just a title that they came up with. It is actually the precursor to a set of policies, including surveillance, which we just discussed yesterday, that will then allow them to assert their power, to assert, in many cases, oppression, arrests, and the like. So when we think about the language that is used in Haiti, it has that same effect. Poverty, the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere is always the thing. This notion of people that just can't get it together. There's a parallel to that on the continent. They're always fighting, always these random wars that just popped up. They just can't get along. I'm mentioning this because there is a tendency to allow the perpetrators to fade into the background. The importance of naming who is doing the harm is central to the notion of reparatory justice. Why? Because Haiti did not just pop up as it is, spontaneously. The conflicts, the challenges that the country faces are not just a product of organic, it's just how it is. There is an intention behind creating the circumstances that Haitians are now dealing with. And if we look at other places around the world, particularly on the continent, even in Central and South America, where there are huge populations of people of African descent, it's the same case. And so what I've noticed is this sort of hesitance about, or perhaps an unwillingness, or maybe just out of ignorance, of not just shining light on the so-called victims, but who are the perpetrators? There's this one-sided notion that Haitians are supposed to just get it all together, fix themselves on their own because they had, this is what they put themselves in. And when we don't name the perpetrators, we actually push the responsibility on them and absolve any of the forces and entities and powers that are responsible for the current conditions. And so when you talk about what is the role of the United States as an occupying force in Haiti, what is the role of the Organization of American States as an occupying force in Haiti? What is the role of France, who, from the beginning, right? And so when you think about even how the countries approach Haiti, they erase themselves. Well, we know why. Why wouldn't they want to erase themselves from the role that they played? But we cannot move forward in any way by allowing those who have been responsible for creating the current conditions to sort of fade in the background and issue statements about, oh, there's all this gang violence, oh, there's this poverty, oh, there's this. Have we thought about trade laws, international trade laws, and how Haiti in the Caribbean is able to trade with its neighbors or not? Who controls those avenues, right? Who controls, when we talk about economic sovereignty, monetary policy, all of these things that seem very nebulous but have a direct impact on Haitians around the world and people of African descent around the world. So the importance of naming the perpetrators, not for just because we want to, just for the purposes of doing that, but because you cannot move toward repair and to actually addressing these challenges without having all parties at the table. And the last piece that I'll just leave with all of you is thinking about how the perpetuation continues, even when we've heard all of the well-intended statements. And so a couple of years ago, there was imagery at the southern border of the United States. It was African migrants or Haitians significantly, but there were other migrants from Cameroon and other African countries. And you see these images of them being essentially corralled and abused as they were attempting to cross the border. And you think about the statements that the US government issues about Haiti, and this was around the time when they had an earthquake, it was a hurricane, it was all kinds of things, the assassination that took place there. And they're still getting deported back to Haiti. They have not been, things like temporary protected status that folks coming from Ukraine have been able to get with no question, with no hesitation. Haitians are still being sent back to those current conditions, while at the same time, the same government will say, we want to consider the livelihood and we are concerned. So we have to think about the current systems and policies and protocols that perpetuate the harm, if we're going to move toward a space where we can actually address those challenges in ways that, to speak to the issue of yesterday, that account for human dignity.
Can you hear me? I have to keep notes, otherwise I will go on forever. But thank you for being here. This is my first in-person conference, so this is exciting to be here in person. So I wasn't here yesterday, so I missed some of the conversation. So if I bring this up in a way that makes it seem novel, please forgive me. But I wanted to start out by talking about empire, and at least only a couple hours into it this morning, that when we're talking about empire, we're essentially talking about capitalism, right? And I think that's something that we need to talk about more centrally, and especially in light of what you said, right? To think about how Haiti is connected to the global system rather than this exceptional thing outside of our understanding. And so, right, when we see the militarization of the world, it's really linked to, it's towards and to make possible capital accumulation. So wherever, right, there's resistance, we're going to see, right, war, we're going to see what appears to be like chaos. I think this is what Haiti really is the case of, right? That this is a space that has been resisting globalization, global capitalism, right? Its position in the global system, and people are continually being disciplined, right? And being told to fit within the model. I want to talk also about, right, thinking about our work as academics to think about Haiti in comparison to other sites that we're studying. So I think about, right, Haiti and Afghanistan, for example, where the narrative by the media is so focused around the insurgents, the terrorists, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, that we also are not hearing about other forms of resistance on the ground, right? That we are completely blinded by this discourse, by this narrative. And in Haiti, you have the similar moment. The gangs have overtaken everything. And that's all we hear, as if there's nothing else happening, as if there's not a story to tell about why their gangs are controlling mostly, right, the capital, where about a third of the population of the country lives, right? So I think we need to dig deeper, and this is what we're trying to do here. And I want to name some names today, right? And I thought I saw him earlier, Jonathan Katz, right, would do the keynote, right, about people doing that kind of work of naming the people who are the hands of empire. Empire isn't this thing above us, right? It's actually being put into effect by people, individuals that we can identify and maybe show up in front of their house, I don't know, and have something to say. So you started out talking about this, the news clips that we saw earlier, back in 2021 now, where all these, 30,000 people had reached the US border at Del Rio, Texas. And we have, April May's in the room, who's been doing research with folks who had appeared on the California border, right, including Haitians. And so we're seeing new waves of migration coming through California, coming through Texas, right, and including Haitians. And a lot of the reports by organizations here in the States receiving these Haitian migrants tell us that a lot of these folks, right, walked from Chile. I wish I had a map so you could appreciate what it means to walk from Chile all the way to the border of Mexico and the United States. 7,000 miles. Children also included, right? What would make people do such a thing? And we just sort of, we think they'll migrate caravans, and we don't think about the story behind it. And we often think, in the story of Central America, it's the gangs. But we don't ask about where the gangs got the guns, right? As Felix said, $5 a day. Where do you get this AK-47s and other armor that I just can't even imagine, right? That folks who are wearing sandals, who don't even have boots, right, are carrying these guns that are bigger than them. So we have to ask the questions about where that's coming from. And right, the narrative ends up stopping at, well, the president was assassinated in July 2021, and then there was an earthquake, right? And folks are not going deeper into what actually is happening. And there's a reason for that. And part of what my work tries to do is to offer this analysis of Haitian migration, but again, also people responding to what's happening in Haiti differently in the form of protests and country shutdowns. And what we find is that, most people don't choose to leave their homes, right? They're being forced out. And in this case, we have many people in Haiti being forced out by the Haitian state and the local oligarchs seizing land for extractivist projects like gold, copper, and other mineral mines, plantations of mangoes, avocados, all the stuff we love to consume here, right? In the global north, even when it's out of season, we still want it. It has to come from somewhere. And of course, right, industrial parks making garments for us, who shop at Zara and H&M and Gap and et cetera, right? And to a lesser degree, tourist compounds. And so these are the folks who are abandoned by the government, but yet taxed, right? And we're talking about street vendors even being taxed. And instead, the government provides subsidies to multinational companies. So this is part of the work that some of us are doing to show that there is a project, right? That Haiti isn't a mistake, that the state hasn't failed. The state is acting as it's designed to, which is an instrument in the hands of very specific people. And the names are very findable, right? Who are basically chopping up, right? Scrambling, I call it the scramble for Haiti, right? They are chopping up the space into several little pieces in free trade zones specifically, right? So we had earlier this talk about the importance of the law, right? That even though this Haitian state, many of us will say, is very much a dictatorship, they always produce decrees, etc., right? To follow along with their plans. So this stuff is findable, right? It's not hidden. And so, this is some of the work that I think journalists could do to support the folks on the ground. My work does something similar, but also focuses a lot on what are the people on the ground doing who are the protesters, right? Because often, again, the way that the images are produced for us here in the West, we see the gangs against the protests, and we see the burning tires, and all you see are usually, right, Black male bodies running amok, and everyone's like, well, what? They have no agenda. They have no solution to the country, right? The narrative of unruly people. I'm getting that sign that. I have so much more to say, but so some of the work is doing that, and so there are viable alternative groups in quote-unquote civil society, who are very well prepared to take over. Now, the issue is, if you have a prime minister who was chosen by absolutely no one, except the president who was assassinated, who was also not chosen by the Haitian people, right? Who is only in existence because diplomatically he's recognized by the quote-unquote international community, including the US, it makes it very difficult for the Haitians on the ground to take over, right, this power structure, if they're not recognized as legitimate interlocutors to, right, within the interstate system. Now, so these folks are on the ground, and these folks are the ones who are protesting, who are often shutting down, right, the country in order to have their say be clear that this is not at all a democratic government. And we did not choose this person who has the power to decide what happens to us, right, including what loans we sign. And this is major. And I'll stop there, and so if we have some time for questions, I will say all the other things.
Thank you all for being here and spending your Saturday morning with us. I'm going to take us a little bit, actually pretty far back in time from the moments that my predecessors here have been discussing. I want to take us back to the time when Haiti was an empire under Jacques I, and the country was under the rule of law of its first constitution, the Imperial Constitution of 1805, although none of the other world powers, in particular the Atlantic world powers, were recognizing Haitian independence. So adding another dimension to the constant stressors, and this is snapshot one, I'm gonna have three little snapshots for you. Besieging independent Haiti was the discursive war that France had waged against the empire of Haiti. Determined to paper the world with their hopes of reconquering Saint-Domingue, which is what they persisted to call the island, numerous essays, historical works, paintings, and novels were published in early 19th century France that seemed to have only the defamation of Haiti and Haitians as their goal. In 1802, for example, the French novelist and playwright René Perrin published one of the first French fictions of the Haitian Revolution. It was called The Burning of Cap, or The Reign of Toussaint Louverture. True to its title, the novel follows the movements of Toussaint and his revolutionaries. The novelist's sympathy is clearly on the side of the French colonists and the white planters, the enslavers. I'm going to take us into the middle of the city of Cap to look there for the victims of this atrocious Negro and offer a portrait upon which, reader, you may be forced to shed many tears. That's what we read in the preface. After a description of how Louverture ordered General Henri Christophe to burn down Cap Français in 1802, the reader is told, the flames had scorched the earth, had destroyed thousands of colonists. The blacks were at the head of the government, if we could call it a government, that assemblage of savages, brutes, disappointed men who, drunk on vengeance, were thrilled to dictate the law. The law! Little did it matter to them that they were reigning over debris, over heaps of ashes. They reigned. The novel's characterization of the Haitian revolutionaries as an army of tigers given over to rage actually reached independent Haiti, where it fell into the hands of Christophe, who wanted to describe its contents in a letter to the emperor. Noting that the book, which he called a little brochure, had come to him via merchant ships from the United States, Christophe sent it to Dessalines. He said it might amuse him in the moments of rest. In the letter, we glimpse not just the philosophical, semantic even, war between Haiti and France, whereby the latter did persist in calling it Saint-Domingue, followed by the United States and England as well, but the physical warfare that had not ceased between the two countries with independence. The contents of this brochure leave no doubt about the views of our enemies, Christophe wrote, since they do not even accord us the title of men, judging that we are not worthy of the liberty that we enjoy, that we conquered using the strength of our arms, and that no power on earth can ever take from us. But let them come, and I will give them new proof. The empire talks. That's snapshot one. Snapshot two. After the Louisiana Purchase became official, the relationship between independent Haiti and the United States cooled. An article published in the Empire of Haiti's official newspaper provided a prescient analysis of the more metaphysical meanings rather than the purely material effects of the change that U.S.-Haitian trade relations have recently undergone under President Thomas Jefferson. The anonymous author, we'll come back to that in a moment, of the article, wrote that the United States would one day and inevitably occupy a distinguished rank among the masters of the sea. The justification for this prophecy now seems so clairvoyant, but it is worth quoting at length. He averred the inevitable decline of France and England and said, the same thing will befall the powers that are presently dominant. They will undergo an unmistakable decline, while the United States will assume the rank to which it is destined. But this era will become deadly for the Caribbean. It will simply change masters. It will come under the yoke of the United States. The writer then pointed out that it was obvious that the US had designs to take over the whole continent of North America. Louisiana was just one case in point. As for ongoing US slavery, he said, in the states of the South, it is a fire that smolders under the ashes, the eventual explosion of which will one day make tremble the hardened and deaf masters who still maintain it, despite the prudent advice of their fellow citizens of the North. One day, he said, some audacious avengers will reclaim with interest their natural rights that have been violated. That was his warning. While most Haitians believed that France was their greatest enemy at this time, with this article, the Haitian people were asked to not ignore the much more serious danger next door in North America. France's attempts will come crashing down like the waves of the sea at the foot of the rock of our independence. And from the mountains, our rescue squad will descend upon them, but a more hidden danger, and one far less apparent, as it is still distant for now, threatens us anyway. It will not be from Europe that our ills must come, if we are to ever experience them. It will come from the continent of the United States. Their too close proximity, the constant coming and going of their citizens in our ports, the expectations that they will bring with them if our government does not do their bidding, must open our eyes to the plots that they may one day attempt against us. It is not at all my intention, the writer concluded, to attempt to place a cloud over the conduct of the Americans, nor do I think at all that either the present government or the individuals who are linked to it through commercial relations with that country have thus far had any plans to dominate us, nor to meditate on our enslavement. Yet he said it is no less true that the possibility of such a combination could arise from a concurrence of circumstances, if ever the United States were to erect itself and become a maritime power. Imperial rage rather than applause followed the publication of this article. Dessalines was highly displeased. He ordered Christophe to discover the identity of the author and to have that person sent to him immediately. Christophe soon learned from the government's printer that the author of the article was none other than Joseph Rouanier, the official English translator of the Empire, and it turns out the editor of the newspaper. The difficult relationship that was unfolding between Haiti and the United States, attested to by Rouanier in his article, only became more difficult once the Haitian government learned that the US Congress had indeed passed more extensive trade restrictions, which stopped just short of being an embargo. So this is before February 1806. Snapshot 3. So that's Empire silences, because Rouanier got in trouble and told never to publish that again. Empire punishes is snapshot 3. In February 1806, Christophe sent Dessalines several extracts from US newspapers that he had just received. One of them contained a message from the President of the United States to the US Congress. It was related to complaints that the French government had made about US citizens who were engaged in commerce with Haiti. Napoleon had repeatedly tried to interfere with US trade to Haiti, urging the US government to break these ties of commerce entirely. Impassioned debates were pronounced on the floor of the Senate, and by impassioned, I mean racist, many of which were favorable to our cause, though also, Christophe said. Just under 2 weeks later, however, Christophe came to believe that the US was going to actually pass the restrictions due to ongoing pressure from the French. He reported to Dessalines that, first of all, a French military division had recently disembarked in Santo Domingo, today the Dominican Republic. The Haitian government would therefore need to be ready for any attack coming from that quarter, particularly in light of what was taking place with respect to US-French relations. I am of the same opinion as your Majesty, Christophe wrote to Dessalines. The Congress of the United States, out of deference to France, could very well forbid commerce between its subject and our country. Around the same time Christophe penned this letter, he had seen a missive from the brother of a US merchant living in Cap. This brother told his brother to continue to remain on the island, to engage in trade there, because he didn't think the bill was going to pass. Though Christophe was skeptical, he acknowledged that the US was in a tricky position in terms of politics and their interests. It would be good for them to drag this matter out, but we are prepared nevertheless. It is worth noting that Christophe was getting this information by unsealing the letters of foreign individuals doing business on the island, and particularly any letter that was coming from the United States. Christophe's fear that the French were planning another invasion had come from one of the letters he unsealed in September 1805. On the 5th of that month, he was the General-in-Chief, Christophe. He told Dessalines he was sending him another letter that came from the American continent. It had been addressed to a woman on the Desbordes plantation in Jérémie. Christophe admitted to having unsealed the letter, as well as several others that had arrived on other foreign ships. They will prove to you, Christophe said to Dessalines, that our enemies have not yet given up hope of invading our country. That was actually how Christophe learned by unsealing these letters that the trade restrictions he feared would be passed in the United States had actually passed on February 28, 1806. Surveillance for the purposes of gathering foreign intelligence would next lead to censorship for the purposes of preventing that intelligence from circulating. For the first time in his correspondence with Dessalines, Christophe ordered information to be hidden from the Haitian people. I have received with your letter, Christophe wrote to Rouanet, a copy of the debates that took place in the United States Senate. I do not think it would really be appropriate to have this inserted in the Gazette. Gather together all the newspapers that you have received that discuss this material, and upon my arrival in Cap, remit them to me, for these are insignificant developments that we do not need to print in our newspapers. While the restrictions did have some deleterious effects, they did not entirely prevent US merchants from continuing to conduct business on the island. Even if the Haitian people were to be exempt from this information, Christophe, of course, had to report it to Dessalines, so he sent him a copy of it. I make haste to inform your majesty that I just learned from a US newspaper that I have the honor of sending to you under this cover that the bill to suspend commercial relations between the United States and our country is passed. Despite having previously downplayed the seriousness of the bill, Christophe observed that already several US businesses had written to their correspondents in Haiti to ask that their funds be returned to them. Christophe had once again learned about this through his surveillance tactics. He reported to Dessalines that he had unsealed several more letters and was also sending them to the emperor as further evidence. There was already a flour shortage in Haiti at this time, but now there was no flour at all, so the consequences of empire. Luckily, a US ship had just docked in Haiti from Baltimore. Christophe wrote to Haiti's Minister of Finance to say that the ship's fortuitous arrival was going to be an immediate balm for the quote-unquote subsistence of the sick and wounded. I assure you, Christophe wrote, that there is no flour at all in our stores, and the sick in our hospitals are barely hanging on and have been subjected to the greatest deprivations. Yet in the letter that Christophe wrote to Dessalines, informing him of the passing of the trade restrictions, he testified to the more acute problem facing the country, the French. Not only were the French at least partly responsible for this increasingly cold and distant relationship between Haiti and the US, but Napoleon had not given up his designs of regaining control of the entire island. The fact that the French were still in possession of Santo Domingo and therefore had military ships constantly in the vicinity of Haiti presented constant perils. In March 1806, French corsairs captured 3 Haitian caboteurs, or coasting ships, and subsequently kept some of the men in their possession. The French eventually released 8 of the men and 2 of the ships, but not before having dismantled and otherwise destroyed them. Christophe was greatly distressed when he learned of this. Consequently, he urged Dessalines to take every measure possible to stop such sabotage. Otherwise, I foresee that every kind of evil might arise, Christophe said. The war that we are in with the French being eternal to the death. Our ships, since they are weaker, should rather crash into the side of these corsairs, and our people should prefer to drown themselves rather than to allow themselves to be captured.
I just want to thank all our panelists for that. I also want to tell everybody that I sent an email saying that they would only speak for 3 to 4 minutes and then we go for discussion. But, you know, it's a great set of panels, and I'm just going to open it up for questions. I have actually one question. Do you think an alternative for Haiti is possible? And anybody on this panel, seeming that empire colludes, empire distorts, empire is global, from yesterday empire imposes systems that we can't escape? So I know, Howard, you had sort of a cynical view of the possibilities of Haiti. Does anybody have any sort of, what was the term, imaginative solutions while we're here?
I'm not about to unveil the solution.
Damn.
This links back to some of the conversation yesterday about, Pan-Africanism and about other kinds of projects in India and in other parts of the world to kind of try to undo the harms of empire. And how many of these projects were forestalled or destroyed or aborted or derailed, right? And I think this is the dilemma right now, that it's so hard to see one's way out of this thing. I want to raise a question about what sort of, I think, intersects everything that's been said here today. When I was a correspondent in Haiti in the early 90s, it was very easy to see how, in economic terms, in geopolitical terms, and in other terms, how Haiti served the interests of empire. It served the imperial project from the perspective of the imperialists, right? You've had the sweatshops, you've had, financial circuits, you had various other things. I wonder, actually, if things are not at the point where, not that the empire has stopped trying to be in charge of empire, but whether the current dispensation in Haiti actually does serve empire anymore. In other words, and I don't ask this question because I've already answered for it, but I wonder if Haiti, so the sweatshops worked really well back then from the perspective of empire, right? Do they still work well today from the perspective of empire? I'm not working on Haiti in that way, so I don't actually know the answer to that. But my guess would be that Haiti's place in those kinds of circuits, industrial, financial, et cetera, has steadily declined in absolute terms, or even in relative terms since that era. And so I wonder if Haiti can be said to be a good project from the perspective of empire itself any longer. That's my question.
But let's not forget that the question was also asked, what's the way out? If anyone
Well, I
knows?
confessed at the beginning,
Yeah.
I don't know that. Yeah.
Well,
I just want to extend.
I'd like to jump in. I think it'd be too easy for us to sit here and say Haiti's never gonna come out. I think the Haitian people believe that they will come out and they have to come out. I'll just say that.
Can you put the microphone closer?
Yeah, sorry. I think Haiti does serve empire. I think what I didn't get to talk about is, speaking about the laws that were passed in the early 21st century and continue to be renewed in Congress in the US in relation to lobbying done by the Association of Industrialists in Haiti. And, again, these were renewed after the earthquake. There's an investment there, and it came to eventually also include different subsidies for products coming out of the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic controls this one garment industrial park that's right at the border. It's Haiti, it's the DR, right? It's in the DR, but all the folks who work there are Haitian and they cross the border to go live in Haiti. So very much so that Haiti is important for empire in that respect economically. Also 2014 or 15, under Joseph Michel Martelly, the Bidjo, which is one of the oligarchs of Haiti, who lives on, is it Star Island, like right next door to Trump in Miami. He was basically granted by the Haitian state an area where he put a free trade zone port, in which who knows what comes through there. And it is one of the 3 ports in the Americas, and this is outside of, I think, Fort Lauderdale and maybe it's Cartagena, Colombia, that has a port able to receive the Panamax boats, which are the boats that can cross the Panama Canal into Asia. Very important. The fact that you have chaos in Haiti means you can trade anything you want through Haiti. Drugs, guns, whatever, minerals, right? So again, very important. Haiti has the largest embassy in the Americas that was built in 2008. Why? What did they have there, right? There are always US soldiers on Haitian soil, always. they've been there since 2004. I think also Haiti has the lowest minimum wage, and we have lots of evidence by those of us who are naming names, who have been in prison, like, Assange, and who show you that there are records between Clinton, when she's the Department of State Secretary, whatever she was at the title, and sending her US ambassador in Haiti to Haitian parliament to say, you will not raise minimum wage in relation to these laws that had been passed that are by national between the US and Haiti. So very much Haiti is part of the project of empire. And I could go on to talk about Haiti's role in the destruction of Venezuela's Petrocaribe, which conservative think tanks like Brookings Institute had said in 2014 to the US while they're lost in the Middle East, oh, we can't let this happen here, we need to undermine it. And we see afterward, right, sanctions coming out of the US against Venezuela and destroying Venezuela's economy that was providing essentially almost free petroleum to the Caribbean. So I'll stop there, but to say that very much so Haiti is important to empire in a myriad of ways, including keeping wages low in the region, right? That's the lowest place you will find. And the industrial park that moved in 2010 left Guatemala because they were told Haiti has lower wages. They want to keep it that way. And we can go on to talk about how capitalism is racial and how Haiti plays a central role in making that so in the region, but I want to give the floor to others.
I don't know if anybody else wanted to touch on either of the questions.
And I will say, if Haiti is to have an alternative, it means that there needs to be one here, right? If this is a center of empire, then what we do here, how we live here, right, is going to determine a lot of things elsewhere. So the knot, that thread that we must pull is right here. Not necessarily just in this room.
Just to the first question, I do think that there's a way out and a way forward. I mean, those of us who work in this space, because you have to believe that there's a way out and a way forward. Otherwise, just pack it up and wait for the meeting or whatever. But I think part of the challenge why these things seem so intractable is sometimes there's this notion that you have to wait for this thing to end for that thing to begin. You have to wait for racial capitalism to be done, and then we can start on the other thing, the thing that's better. And at least in my view, that's not actually the case. We have to be constructing and building the next, the new, our world, even as we simultaneously are trying to dismantle the systems that have been created that are oppressive, that are harmful. We don't have the luxury of waiting for one thing to end or just focusing on, okay, let's get this one, dismantle that, and then we will start. We have to do it simultaneously. And the reality is that the new, the next, what we call alternatives, which hopefully will become the main, are being built. They do exist. Many of those systems and structures are not new in the sense that it's some innovation or some tech company that decided they wanted to create something. They're actually historical and cultural ways of being that cultures around the world had and adopted that actually work, but we cast them aside, or they were forced out or disappeared by the system of capitalism, the system of exploitation, etc. So the first is we have to do it at the same time. And because it is happening, I know that they can be scaled, they can be expanded. The notion that we are living in someone else's imagination, but we also have that as a birthright, as creativity as a birthright. It's something that I talk about. This nightmare, if you will, it emerged out of the imagination of people that believed in exploitation, that believed that some people are just not human, that believe that this notion of polar, these poles of power, that the US or Britain or these European countries have some kind of inherent value that others don't have. They believed these things and they built the systems that reflect that. But my mother would always say when someone gets straight A's and she didn't get straight A's, well, did they have two heads? No. They don't. So you can actually do the same or better, but build the systems that reflect our values of justice, of dignity, of communalism, at least in my view. We can do that. Unfortunately, you know, the current circumstances are that this is the world that we happen to be living in this time. But we still have the ability to create, to imagine outside of this framework, and to create and to build. And that work is actually happening. And so that's why I think, yes, the challenges are what they are, but there's also a very long arc of existence. We're just a very small part of it. So the question is, what do we do with that small part that we inhabit? And I think we can actually do some things to move us toward systems that are actually harmonious and that actually make sense.
I would just add, I mean, we can also demand, put pressure on France to repay Haiti the indemnity, interest, and adjust it for inflation. It's absolutely egregious. I'm grateful that the New York Times shined a brighter spotlight, brought the story to more people, but the cop-out is, you know, Élysée has no comment. No, Élysée has a comment. They have to have a comment. There's no way in which this current president gets to leave the office he's in, Emmanuel Macron, without a comment on this, which is the greatest heist in human history, to roll up with, you know, 500 cannons and 14 warships and demand the signing of an indemnity. And regardless of the reason that Boyer signs it, it doesn't matter. The Haitian people protested it. They did not sign it, and they are the ones who have had to suffer the consequences. So even if it did serve the interests of a global elite, it's the Haitian people who have suffered, and they are the ones who deserve repayment, which is different from reparations, which Haitians also deserve, not just for slavery, but for the US occupation and the subsequent UN occupation, particularly MINUSTA. And so when we talk about the way forward, to me, it's very interesting that hardly anybody will outright say Haitians should get this money primarily because they say, well, the government would squander it, or who would, that all of these things. It's always not the right time. When is the right time? Haitians need to eat, they need water, they need basic things for human existence. And for us to say, no, you have to put your house in order, the house that we completely came in and trashed, is to voyer wash cache main, to throw a stone while hiding your hand.
Yeah.
I just want to add, part of the US occupation in 1915 was to buy up that loan and then take on the interest and give them more loans. That was paid off in 1948 by Estime when he was promptly overthrown shortly thereafter. Yeah, go ahead.
So I really love the substance and the spirit of what you said. But my study of empire, and this is not contradictory, my study of empire, especially French Empire in Africa, has taught me the following. And I think it applies broadly to empire. Empires, one of the qualities of empires is the privilege, because they are empowered, to determine what they can afford and what they can't afford. So France, in colonizing Francophone Africa in a certain period of time, thought it made best sense to empower certain segments of the Francophone population who lived in capital cities in the French colonies, to give them the full rights of French citizenship. Because in doing so, they understood that this small privileged African elite would deepen their allegiance to France, and then therefore would work to protect France's interests on the continent, right? And when the rest of the people in those colonies decided, hey, having the full rights of French people makes sense. After all, we fought more wars, they've taken more of our resources, you know, they've done all of these other violent things to us. We should have full rights and privileges of French citizenship too. France then suddenly shifted direction altogether without blinking, without batting an eye, and said, no, that would be totally impossible. That's, how could you expect French people to provide social security for all of the people of Senegal or all of the people of Cote d'Ivoire and to allow them to freely come back and forth to France just like any other French person might be able to do, right? So this is the dilemma. The dilemma isn't to say whether Haitians actually deserve this and are in fact owed these things. The dilemma is, and I think this was implicit in what you said, how to impose this on France, how to transact that, right? And this is a power problem, right? And so this is, and that's where I say I don't know the answer yet, right?
And I would add to what Howard just said, you're not just then dealing with France. Because if France pays back all the stuff it owes to Haiti, all the reparations, especially if it reverberates in the United States, are we gonna do this? And all throughout the whole world that was built on the slave economy back then would also be complicit in a good way in rounding up the funds to pay back to their African diaspora population. And I would think that the American president would say to Macron, if he said, oh yeah, I will pay back the $40 billion I owe to Haiti.
No
They
way.
would say like, you're not doing that.
Right.
So it is, you're putting two worlds against each other.
And I think reparation opens up a larger conversation about redistribution at large and the settler colony in which we sit today. I think this is why
That's
we
another-
begin to pull that, it unravels the entire project that is.
Right, it's the thread you pull and nothing good happens.
Yes.
And
Isn't
that
it
is
interesting?
actually happening. We've had conversations with ambassadors from the EU. There are these efforts, these not even half done, but these gestures of, oh, we'll start a development fund, or we'll invest $10 million in Denmark for
Oh,
this
right,
and
right,
that. So, and one of the biggest things that stands out in talking to representatives from these European countries is, first of all, you just didn't say the R word, right? Reparations is the R word. You didn't say it because once you say it, it actually makes it concrete. You definitely don't acknowledge it, because if you acknowledge it, that means that there's some responsibility for remedy. And then you definitely don't agree to anything, because as you said, if you agree to something, we're all complicit. We all have to now face this thing, which would actually require a complete restructuring of the global world order. That's the work that we're doing, but this is a very real, that fear is a very real phenomenon.
Right, I noted in the New York Times big takeout on all of this, that there was a poor little person from a bank in France, from the Banque de Crédit National,
Right.
who said, we would think about repaying what we owe from this, and then there was radio silence. He's probably been removed from his job.
To build on what Marlene was saying, we can say empire colludes, right? And it's clear that only certain people have popped up at The Hague for war crimes, you know? I'm waiting for some people who were in office from 2000 and 2008. I don't think that's gonna happen. And if anybody doesn't have anything here to say, or afterwards, to be honest with you, I can turn it over for the last few questions from the crowd. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you need a microphone?
I wanna share a worry about reparations.
Yeah.
I think for this is a sympathetic audience.
Can
It
I-
goes back to, sorry.
Yeah.
So, it goes back to some of the things that we were saying yesterday about the relationship between states and capitalism. But I'm a little bit concerned that when we talk about reparation, we make the agent responsible for reparation the state. And since we're now talking about democratic states, and since states now share responsibility between their citizens, I think the worry is that ultimately the French workers will end up, and the French kind of vulnerable people and migrants and so on, end up paying the price for something that's ultimately a responsibility of which the beneficiary is French capital.
Right.
So I'm a bit concerned that when we talk about reparations and we talk about it as a relationship between states, you actually end up obscuring what is really the dynamic of complicity underlying this pattern of power relation between states. So I was wondering if you have thoughts on this, because I've become very worried about the use of the term reparation and actually of the category of historical injustice, which makes it sound like it's something in the past, it's about history, it's about relations between states and so on. When actually what is at stake is constantly the dynamic of capital that reproduces itself throughout centuries and continues to be the same. So I just wanted to know about what you thought, whether you have thoughts on kind of the discourse around it and the symbols of making use of those terms and what that does and whether it actually productive.
Yeah, I mean, I'll respond to that because that's a very real concern. But a part of it is how we define reparations and reparatory justice. And one of the tenets, so there's a compensation component, which tends to get a lot of attention because that's, the actual payment of agent fee and so on and so forth. But the fifth component, and which is one of the most important components, is a guarantee of non-repetition that's also required. A guarantee of non-repetition means that the conditions that created the harm cannot reoccur, right? And so what that implies is the system, structures, and institutions that exist that perpetuate the harm. And the reality is that even as we who live in the global north or who live in the US or even those who live in France still benefit from the current systems, structures, and institutions that continue to exploit vast parts of the world.
Yeah.
And so it's a difficult conversation to have because I have relatives in France and London who they're not, they're certainly not part of the elites. They are working class, but they're still, even for those who are not part of the elites in their country, there's still a benefit to residing in a space that derives value based upon extraction, primarily from the global south. And so it's not something that, because it can seem unfair, like why should we have to pay for X, Y, and Z when we are actually oppressed in our own country? As a Black person living in America, I could ask that same question, but it doesn't absolve the systems, institutions, and structures that have to be fundamentally changed, dismantled in many instances, to create the kind of world that actually reflects human dignity across the board. It's the systems that we created, and part of reparatory justice is undoing, dismantling those systems. So we have to say, are we willing to do that? Are we willing to fight for that? Or do we maintain the status quo, which as we live, our carbon footprint and all the things that we enjoy living in this country or living in Europe, it is still to the detriment and to the exploitation and the harm of the rest of the world.
Leah, empire has anticipated your question. In the specific French African example I gave, empire in the moment when Francophone Africans began demanding citizen rights, which had been guaranteed to a tiny sliver of the urban population, empire actually said it hid behind French workers. It says we can't tax French workers to do that. That would be unreasonable. They actually said that out loud, right? And so this is at the same time a real problem and an excuse, right? And that's part of the complexity of it. How do you get beyond? How do you eliminate the excuse making and deal with the real problem, right?
Can I just also add that, we talk about empire, capitalism, as these concepts, real people make it work. So there are people who have generational wealth, right? Specific families who have specific wealth coming out of this project that is ongoing, that I think bear the brunt of the responsibility, even if all of us here, right, are enjoying our global north existence. I included, who rah-rah about social movements in Haiti. I'm teaching at UCI, right? So we're all benefiting on this end, but I think there are some of us who have been intimately involved in the manufacturing and designing of this system historically, who the state should call upon. I think that's the role of the state. I don't think we think it's this, the state has to facilitate the process rather than the state has to do the repair.
And history knows who they are.
Legacy
Yes.
case.
And there's also transnational businesses from the start, right? That have funded and financed all of these, that some of whose descendants, not people, but institutions exist today.
It's like we were talking about Scandinavian countries. They're like, we never had boots on the ground. It's like, but you were involved in the financial piece.
Right.
So that's, there's some responsibility there.
I would add that it might be a philosophical question, but for me, and I think for all of us sitting up here, the Haitian people right now, are not they shouldn't be the ones to bear the burden of the philosophical conundrum that it puts us into, because it is contradictory to many of the principles that we generally espouse, but there's human lives at stake. And it seems interesting to me that when reparations for slavery in general, but particularly for Haiti come up, suddenly it's like, oh, but doesn't that go against our principle? When so many groups in US history and in European history have gotten reparations. And I would like to add that the Sandy Hook families got an enormous pay. They may never see a dime of that money, but out of an idea that they were harmed materially by the actions of Alex Jones. So it's very interesting to me that then in the case of Haiti, we don't even entertain the symbolic, what it would symbolically mean to say, France is on trial, the United States is on trial, and you will have to pay up at some point. It's very interesting. It's like the only case we can't go there because what else will happen? And
Everything.
And everything does happen. And on that note, I want to thank my panelists for